Hello, this is the first video in a new sort of little series I'm going to be doing, which is all about reading books by women, about women, and I'm going to be like looking at them from sort of like a feminist angle. I myself identify as a feminist. I think feminism is really important, and when I was at university I wrote my dissertation using like a feminist analytical viewpoint, and I love feminist literature, so that's what this series is going to be about. I will be reading non-fiction and fiction, some of which might not be like explicitly written to be feminist, but might just have like really prominent female characters, but that I find interesting to look at from that viewpoint. I also have like an in real life book club that I'm part of, which is an intersectional feminist book club based in the city I live in, which is really great, and has made me read a lot of books that I wouldn't necessarily have picked up by myself. So some of those might be included, and I might also talk about different viewpoints that maybe some of my book club friends have had that differ from mine, and try to offer different perspectives. So that's what this series is going to be. The first book I'm starting off with, you may have seen if you watched my first Books That Matter unboxing. I'm currently reading Things a Bright Girl Can Do by Sally Nichols, which is about women's suffrage in 1914. Let me just double, 1914, I should know that. I should really know that. This follows three female characters. Evelyn, who's like 17 and has been told that by her parents that she can't go to university, and so she's sort of doing it, joining the suffragettes to rebel against her parents, but also because she, believes in these things. But she's got a complex view on things, because half the time she worries about getting involved in the things that might send her to prison, and then half the time she finds some of what the suffragettes are doing, just handing out like pamphlets and things, boring, and is like, I kind of want to set fire to stuff, which is interesting to read about. And then we follow May, who is I think 15, and her mum's quite progressive. May identifies as a Sapphist, so there's a female-female relationship in here, and May's just like ready to get stuck in with anything. She finds people really fascinating. She's like a really interested in the world kind of character, so she's fun to read about. And then there's Nell, who is the girl that May meets near the beginning of the book and becomes really interested in. And Nell is from like a poorer part of the East End, and she is really interested in the suffragette movement. She gets very involved, and I think it's really interesting to have different perspectives of Nell, who's quite working class, and May, who's lives alone with her single mum because her dad, I think, passed away, but she's got a bit more money than Nell. And then Evelyn, whose family lives in like a big house and who have a significant amount of money, more than the other characters, especially more than Nell. So it's good that we're getting the perspectives of different classes. I think often people just think about maybe one angle of the suffragettes, like the richer suffragettes, who can get away with doing more dangerous stuff than the working class ones, who were the ones that were more at risk. But I think it's really interesting that there's so far a female-female relationship that's just building, and there's a couple of other queer characters in here. So I'm excited to see where that's going to go. I wonder if it's going to tackle race and ethnicity issues, because that's another sort of critique of the suffragettes, was that it was very white. There were some prominent women of colour in the suffragettes and the suffragists, but they're often forgotten about in history. So I think it'll be interesting to see if that goes into, if this book goes into that, but I'm not sure yet. It's not been mentioned so far. But yes, I'm enjoying it so far. My sister is reading it alongside me because I already owned this copy, and then the Books That Matter box had a copy in it, so I gave that to my sister, and she's, I think, a little bit ahead of me, but the chapters are really short, so it's quite easy to get through. I think I'm exactly on page 100, so I'm going to get back to this and I'll update you soon. It's taken me a little while to get through this because I'm like halfway through and nothing's really happened. I mean, stuff has happened, characters have met, relationships have developed, certain things have happened, but it also kind of feels like nothing has happened. Finished this morning Things the Right Girl Can Do. Now, I did enjoy this, I did like it, but it's not quite what I thought it was gonna be, because about halfway through, I mean, I sort of feel like I should have expected it, because about halfway through, the war, World War I comes into it, which of course it does, because it's set in the beginning in 1914 and goes through 1915, 16, 17, 18. So of course the war is a plot point in here. But I feel like it sort of becomes about the war more so than about like the suffragettes. And they keep mentioning suffragettes and suffragists and stuff, because there are a lot of conversations about how like the suffragettes are responding to the war and like whether they condone it or support it or whatever. And like different characters have different opinions on it, and obviously like side characters, the male side characters are all affected because a lot of them have to go off to war. So obviously it was going to factor into it. The three main girls, their plots stopped being about like being suffragettes. Like Evelyn, who's the eldest character, who joins the suffragettes and goes on like a hunger strike, and her plot's like really about doing or not doing what her parents want, and what she wants for herself. Her plot kind of just becomes about a guy, which irritated me because I feel like more could have been done with her character. And she always argued like against the thing that was expected of her, like, to other people, like to her best friend Teddy and her dad and her mum and stuff. But then her internal monologue seemed really contradictory, and so I felt like a lot of her character was just, she was going against what other people wanted, kind of to be contrary, rather than because it's what she believed. So I felt conflicted about her character. Nell was probably my favourite. She's the East End girl, who's like working class. A lot of her story is to do with having to find a job so she can help her family pay rent, and seeing things in a different way to how she's always seen them, like when she realises that there are other people who are women interested in women, and that's like a whole community that she never knew about, and that like she can have more from life than she has had. I thought she was the most engaging character. And then May, who's the suffragist character, who's Nell's love interest at points throughout the novel, was probably my least favourite. I just felt the least engaged with her. And I never felt like a huge amount of chemistry between Nell and May. I feel like their internal monologues were very like, she's the best person I've ever met and I love her and stuff. But in their dialogue, I never super got that. I was never like convinced of that. But I was really happy that there was queer representation in here. In terms of like other representation, there are points where Nell, who's like a very dresses like a man, doesn't have any sort of notions of being like a traditional woman, is like never going to be a housewife, that kind of thing, like sort of explicitly in her internal monologue says like maybe it'll be easier if she were a boy. Sometimes she feels like she identifies with more of like traditionally masculine things than she does with feminine things, and I wondered if that was gonna be delved into more, but it's not. It's just sort of a question thrown out there, but it's never overtly said whether she like genuinely is like gender dysphoric or anything like that. My camera cut off last time and then I thought of more things that I wanted to say. So I was talking about representation and how I didn't know if she was going to go anywhere with the gender thing, which she didn't, but I think that's something maybe she could have explored, or definitely a way that you could read the book. Also, at the beginning, before I started it, I wondered if she was going to go into like race, because the sort of ignoring women of colour is like a prominent, prevalent thing that happened with the suffragettes and the suffragists. And there wasn't really any mention. I think at one point they mentioned Princess Sophia, I think it is, who was like a wealthy suffragette, but she was mentioned like in the story in terms of her wealth, not in terms of her race. So that wasn't really delved into, and I don't know if that's because the author didn't think it was her place to maybe talk about that stuff, but I feel like there could have been at least a few instances, lines where it was mentioned. I think I would have enjoyed this book way more if it were two separate stories. If it were Evelyn's story and like her relationship, her education, all that stuff, and then Nell and May, their story. If it was two separate stories, two separate books, so we could get proper focus on the characters, because their stories never really intertwined, which I was kind of expecting to happen, but didn't. I think I could have got way more invested in the characters and their relationships than I did because I felt like very surface level with most of the characters. But I think if we'd had if it had been two separate stories that had their own themes, I think I could have got way more invested. I had this conversation, this video edition was spurred on by a conversation I had with my sister, who also read the book, finished it a few days before me. She has my extra copy now, and yeah, we were having this conversation. We said we felt like Evelyn's story we never hugely got into, because every time we started to get into her story it would go back to Nell or May, and vice versa. Evelyn felt like a very sort of shallow, surface level character, and anytime I started to feel connected to her or get her passion, see where she was going, her story would then change and be about something else. Initially it was about suffragettes, then it started to be about her education, and then it seemed to become all about her relationship, which in a full-length novel I think would have been okay as a natural progression. But because it was half or a third of a book with two other characters, it felt like it all moved along quite quickly and didn't feel like a natural progression. Felt like this book is we're halfway through this book, something needs to change, this is going to happen, or we're nearing the end now, this is going to happen. But that's just a personal preference thing, that I think it could have narratively been better as two separate stories. That's what I think. These are all just my opinions. This book's got a really high rating on Goodreads. I enjoyed it. I would have given it 3.5 stars. It's just a shame because I was expecting it to be at least a 4-star. But while I overall enjoyed it, and I think historically and socially it was really informative and really interesting, there was just something about it that stopped me giving it that next half-star to get to 4 stars. And my sister, we had a lot of the same feelings about it. She rated it, I think, the same as me. But yeah, I still recommend it for the historical context of the suffragettes. I think is interesting. There are some facts in there that I didn't know. A lot to do with their planning and stuff. Historical context for the war, interesting, especially as it's not about the soldiers, it's about the women and the children who had to stay home. I think that's really interesting because often in wartime novels it's all about the men. So historically, socially, and for the inclusion of queer representation, I recommend it. But yeah, those are my thoughts for this first Feminist Friday video. I hope this has been enjoyable. I plan to do more. Thank you for watching. Bye.